So one of the things that happened after the attack, and it's not the first time it's happened, obviously a lot of social media activism, obviously hashtag activism, and the fad of changing one's profile picture to the French tricolor, which I'll admit I did, and a lot of other people did, including some pretty right-wing talk show hosts, was criticized after the fact because obviously a couple of weeks earlier was the Bheard thing. Several hundred Russian people died in what was apparently an ISIS attack. So it was viewed as a rather selective response to this. In terms of understanding the attack and the response to it, how big is social media? And how much of that is a real indication of how people feel about things?
I think social media is very instrumental and very powerful in that regard because for a long time, so many people, especially communities of color, marginalized communities, feel like as if they do not have a voice and do not have representation in the mainstream. So this has been a tremendous tool that they push back. And they did things like, the Bheard attack happened right before this and nobody cared. Why aren't we getting as much coverage? Do our lives not matter? And then, it goes back to the same thing with Black Lives Matter. These things start on social media because it's finally an avenue by which people who may not have always had a voice get to have that opportunity to have a voice and push back against some of this stuff.
What about the concern that always attends anything, particularly on Twitter, which is that these issues are rather complex, one might say. Going back to the Sykes-Picot agreement and everything since then, can you really deal with this stuff in 140 characters at a time? Is that a legitimate way to approach any of these issues?
I think it's a way to start the conversation or to change the conversation, whatever the situation is, and then delve into it through another avenue deeper or whatever. I think it's a good way because obviously you can't, save the world or resolve some sort of crises in 140 characters, but it's an initial place to start any kind of dialogue and then take it from there to whatever else.
But you put the French flag on your Facebook profile.
I did.
So what was your kind of...
I think because I really felt like I could have been one of those people who were a victim, and that's different. Bheard is an amazing city, and my wife wants to go there, and we will someday, but I've never been. But we got engaged in Paris, and I love Eagles of Death Metal. I felt a certain. It was the tricolor was a granted crude and simpler way to signify that I felt a true kinship with the victims. But I really haven't before. More so even than, September 11th, obviously those were New Yorkers, but I didn't know anybody who works in the World Trade Center, so I didn't feel that quite as personally.
And there was no Twitter back then, really.
That's true, which is hard to think about. Yeah.
But it's interesting that kinship is expressed as a kind of support for a nation state, right? That's the way it's translated.
Right. Well, on that note.
Yes, in the water.